You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 2nd of September 2025 on Monocle Radio.
China prepares a massive military parade. Who is the real audience? Is direct action likely to make any difference to facts on the ground in or the sea around Gaza? And social media as the modern pillory. Why the urge to shame? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Julie Norman and James Rogers will discuss today's big stories, and we'll hear from the founder of an initiative recasting the Irish storytelling tradition for the modern age and the wider world. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Julie Norman, Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at UCL and co-author of the upcoming book Gaza, the Dream and the Nightmare, and by James Rogers, Associate Professor of International Journalism at City University of London. Hello to you both.
Hi, Andrew.
Julie, we have there started caning your imminent new book, so feel free to go ahead and cane it further. When is it actually out? And obviously, it is about Gaza, but give us a bit on what aspect of Gaza it's about.
Yeah, the book comes out on October 24th in the UK and on January 6th in the US and Canada. And it's a book that tells really the story of Gaza with how Gaza got to this point for over the last 100 years. So we walk through the initial of why Gaza became the Strip, through the occupation, through Hamas's success there in the election, and then up to the war today, up through January. And we speak with a lot of everyday people, journalists, aid workers, students, just everyday Gazans about all these different points in history and really how there was so much potential for Gaza at each of these different junctures and how things kept getting deeper and deeper into the kind of context that we've seen now.
You will obviously have one attentive reader on the other side of this table, that being, James, you lived in Gaza for a couple of years as a correspondent.
I did, from 2002 to 2004, and the territory was very different then, and life then I thought was unimaginably hard, but now it is. I literally cannot imagine what it was like. And of course, it was a very different territory then, in the sense that there were still Jewish settlements on the territory.
I was there not long after you left, in fact.
And this may indeed turn out to be one of the plans that the Israeli government is considering again for the future. And it was they were originally built there in the 1970s after Israel occupied the territory in the 1967 war, for security. But the people who lived there were sort of devoutly religious and believed that this was part of the land of Israel and it was their holy duty to settle it. They lived in very nice, ostensibly suburban houses, but of course the settlements were very, very heavily fortified. And when I was there, any Palestinian who might be nearby did risk getting shot at by the army, and a number of farmers were just going about their business and their fields were fired upon. So. And then they left. So, again, I will very much look forward to reading Julie's book and seeing that my particular experience put into a wider context.
Well, we will be discussing Gaza later in the show, but we start in Beijing, which is hours away from hosting a major military parade in honour of Victory Day, commemorating China's defeat of Imperial Japan in World War II. It is arguably a bit cheeky of the People's Republic of China to appropriate this event on the grounds that it didn't exist in 1945, which was the year the people who eventually founded the PRC renewed their civil war against the people who actually defeated Japan, i.e. the Republic of China, now trading as Taiwan. History being written as usual by the winners, China will trundle a formidable arsenal across Tiananmen Square beneath the gaze of President Xi Jinping and other Communist Party panjandrums and guests of honour President Vladimir Putin of Russia and Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un of North Korea, among others. Julie, first of all, will you be staying up for this?
I mean, my week has been set around this parade. The thing I'm most looking forward to is the 80,000 doves that are supposed to be launched. I feel like what could go wrong there? I don't know. But no, I mean, obviously this is a huge spectacle, and it's, a very visual, I think, telling of where world politics are going right now with this, increasing convergence of powers that have always been sort of nodding to each other, somewhat aligned, but really in this current context with the U.S. And under Trump's leadership, it's really just creating this opportunity for much closer alignment between China, Russia, North Korea, and I would say also, a much more open hand with India right now, too, on the back of Trump's tariffs against India.
Well, indeed so. And on the subject of the guest list, James, we have President Putin is going. Kim Jong-un has arrived on his weird Bond villain armoured train, which, to be honest, I'm extremely envious of. But also leaders from Iran, Zimbabwe, Myanmar, Malaysia, among others. Is there a real alliance coalescing here? Because quite a few of these countries, it's hard to imagine China really likes all that much. And I would add Russia and North Korea to that list, in fact.
I don't think there is a real sort of deep alliance here. I think this is something that in the contemporary state of global affairs, it suits these countries to work together. There's no uniting ideology in the way that perhaps there was amongst communist and socialist countries in the 20th century. So I think it's sort of, it suits Russia and China to have the relationship that they do at the moment. But of course, talking about even when they were both communist countries, they didn't have a brilliant relationship in the second half of the last century. So I don't think there's any deep-seated alliance. I think this is more of a marriage of convenience, if one can use that phrase about international relations. It's not something that, I think will necessarily endure. They seem that their interests coincide. They're trying to define the world as not being run by America. And I think probably China's idea in bringing all these countries together is to try to benefit from some of the ill will that's proceeded from the United States policy on tariffs.
Well, on the subject of America, Julie, you are once again here as the sort of designated scapegoat for that nation. Do we imagine that this parade is likely to drive President Donald Trump into fresh paroxysms? Because say whatever else you will about the Chinese Communist Party, and I'm very likely to agree with you, or indeed the People's Liberation Army, but that they're going to put on a proper show. Compare and contrast with that rather half-assed shuffle past that was sort of grudgingly organised in honour of the birthday of the US Army and indeed Donald Trump quite recently.
Indeed. I mean, I think one thing we all know is not to try and predict Trump's reactions to pretty much anything. And so, I mean, he will obviously notice this. Obviously, I think, kind of push him for yet bigger and better on his own turf. But at the end of the day, again, Trump, it's very much about him, about what is suiting him in the U.S. in that moment. And I think the idea of other countries doing this, like, it's not, I don't think it will ruffle him maybe or concern him perhaps as much as maybe it would some other leaders, because he's just not quite so much, he's not so worried about the international relations component. He's worried about what's happening for the U.S. at that moment.
Returning to the subject of the guest list, James, and especially the two big-ticket guests, i.e. Putin and Kim, is it possible that there is a double-edged aspect to their attendance, as in they are being shown this awesome display of Chinese military might, not just as a kind of gesture of support from an ally, but also possibly a reminder of, don't screw with us, we know who's really in charge here?
Well, yes, very possibly. And you may have seen some of the things speculating recently. Of course, there's been a lot of talk since the escalation of the war in Ukraine that China might one day try to invade Taiwan. And I read a very interesting article recently suggesting that actually China might try to invade Siberia. Because there's a lot of rich resources on Russia's Pacific coast. It's not very densely populated, and Russia, of course, is militarily engaged elsewhere at the moment. So I think there may well be an element of that. But I think we also need to remember that, of course, back in May, Putin had his 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany, which, in previous years would have seen leaders from all over Europe and the West flock to there. They didn't, but she was there. So I think maybe this is a sort of invitation back. And of course, Putin loves military parades even more than the next man, one might say.
Just finally on this, Julie, is there also possibly a bit, well, obviously there's theatre about this, there's theatre about any parade, but a kind of overcompensating theatre in that there has been this will they, won't they about China and Taiwan for decades. China has by and large operated fairly cautiously with regard to adventures abroad. They haven't fought really a war since a minor dust-up with Vietnam in 1979. do they still want to look like a military power, even if they're not actually, when the crunch comes, interested in exercising military power?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that's not unique to China. I would say a lot of states, invest in military for that purpose, to flex to other countries, and it's somewhat of a deterrence effect as well. And so this isn't new to China, but I would say, Taiwan, aside from Trump, Taiwan is going to be watching this very closely, and this kind of convergence around China in this kind of new world order is something that I think that will be concerning there much more than, say, in Trump's world for the moment.
Well, let's look at Gaza now, which is at least the plan of the flotilla of pro-Palestinian activists which embarked last night from Barcelona. It is their second attempt after being forced back to port by uncooperative weather on Sunday. A second wave of craft will set sail from Tunis on Thursday. Though the ships are carrying food and medicine which the crews ostensibly intend to distribute upon arrival, the likelihood is that they are sailing with every expectation of being intercepted by the Israeli Navy, as a similarly motivated yacht was in June. Aboard that craft and aboard this flotilla is the Swedish climate change campaigner Greta Thunberg. James, first of all, is this likely to make any difference to anything much?
Yes and no, I would say to that. In the terms of the likelihood of their reaching the port of Gaza, I think very unlikely. I think they will be stopped by the Israeli Navy, as they suggested. But I think that, generally speaking, particularly among activists like this, there is a feeling of utter despair and a feeling of powerlessness. And I think doing something like this at least makes them feel that they are doing something. They're trying to do something. They're drawing continuing attention to the killing and the starvation that's going on in Gaza. So I think in that sense it may make a difference. It may help to, sometimes in these sort of conflicts where there isn't even any proper reporting, from outside, in the sense, while Palestinian journalists have done a courageous job in the face of, unimaginable violence and risk, there is no real way for outside people to influence what's happening there at all. So I think in that sense this is worth it. But I mean, I can only hope that it's not going to end with yet more casualties, which of course, previous attempts to do similar things have, and the Israeli army have shown that when I was in Gaza, for example, 2 international activists were killed by the Israeli army. So this is not something, particularly in the present climate, which is going to trouble them. So there is risk involved too, definitely.
Julie, in your researches for your book, did you have much discussion with Gazans and or Palestinians about what they make of the efforts made on their behalf by people overseas? Because I can remember going back to my own visit to Gaza a long time ago, though it was, and a couple of younger Gazans I met who had, I think, a slightly sort of more nuanced, not to say jaundiced view of the outside world did remark to me that one of the frustrations of their position was that their cause did keep taken up by the most annoying people in Europe.
I mean, I would say, obviously it varies by person. I would say it cuts both ways. I mean, there is a lot of sentiment to, what James was just alluding to, this sense that no matter what the international community does, whether it's protests, whether it's court cases, whether it's recognizing Palestine, that nothing changes on the ground for, especially in these times that we're in now. But at the same time, there is a sense of a recognition of not being forgotten, and the sense of seeing the protests. I think this last year, seeing the protests in the U.S. in particular, that really demonstrated at least some shift of public opinion there, was mentioned multiple times to me as standing out as particularly significant. And as well, the ongoing, demonstrations and whatnot in Europe. Things like the flotilla and stuff like that, I think, they might register for a short amount of time. I think it's the more sustained activism that has most of the impact. The one exception to that would, of course, be the Mother Marmara back from 2010, where there were, I believe, 8 or 10 activists that were killed. And
10, I think it was, yeah.
And that did end up impacting the flow of goods into Gaza afterwards, because it got so much international attention. But I don't think it would have the same effect on Israel now either.
But is this a demonstration of? I mean, there is, James, and it's not to say it's not important and it doesn't matter, because it is and it does. But there is a monomania attached to Palestine that there is not not to any other cause on earth. Nobody, for example, is sending a flotilla in aid of Yemen or Sudan or any, I know you can play this game all day, but any one of a dozen others you can think of.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something that afterwards I wrote, and I thought a lot about my experience in the region in the years afterwards, and I've incorporated a lot of those reflections into my teaching of the next generation of journalists, some of whom I hope will be allowed to go and see for themselves what's happening there. And if you think about this tiny sliver of land, Israel and the Palestinian territories between the Mediterranean and the River Jordan, you have sites that are sacred to three of the world's major religions. You have this crossroads which, preeminent global powers, the United States, the United Kingdom in its time in the 20th century, others before Ottoman Empire, have tried to influence. It is tied, this tiny bit of land, tied by faith, by history, and by contemporary politics to all parts of the world. I mean, can you think of any other international story that the United States has invested so much diplomatic time and money in over the last half century? And I think that's why it does attract this attention. It's interesting too. I mean, I came to the conclusion that when there was absolute total absence of a peace process, as there has been really the last 20 years or so, then journalistic coverage sort of falls off because there's no sort of sense that there will be any consequences of anything that's happening at the moment. Now it's different because we do know that whenever this war ends and however it ends, that part of the world is going to be different from what it was on October the 6th, 2023. So I think that's why there's so much attention on it for all those reasons.
And just to come back to that and referring again to your upcoming book, Julian, I hope this isn't a spoiler, but was there a coherent sense from Gazans you spoke to of what they thought was a plausible outcome to all this? Like a Gaza that maybe one day will again, flourish and thrive as a Palestinian society?
Yeah, again, I would say varies so much by different individuals of what their vision is, but there's definitely a strong vision for Palestinian self-determination, for Palestinian democracy, for a thriving state. And again, these aren't unrealistic dreams in the sense of what the land has to offer. I mean, people remember a time when Gaza was different, when it was a crossroads for trade from east to west, from north to south, when it was kind of a civilizational hub. And
it had a port and an airport.
Yes, and when it really had the potential to be, a real center for a thriving, Arab world or a Palestinian state. And so those are dreams that are still kept alive. And that's one thing that again, in the book we emphasize mainly because everyone we spoke to very much emphasized that.
Well, let's move along somewhat, and to reason, apparently, to be even more grateful than usual to listeners to the Monocle Daily, which, to be clear, is very grateful indeed. Research by various boffins has pinpointed an increasing phenomenon of news avoidance. People abjuring news broadcasts, disdaining newspapers, deleting pertinent apps, even switching off such vital current affairs fora as this, the Monocle Daily. Across nearly 50 countries by one survey, fully 40% of respondents admitted deliberately zoning out, the highest percentage ever recorded. The US and the UK posted some of the biggest numbers. James, are you surprised by this?
I think I probably am. I mean, I think it's. I think this is an extremely serious issue, and I'll explain why I think that. Because we have had, for the last, in Europe, the last century, 150 years, however you sort of time it, we've had mass media of one sort or another, and it's so coincided with the growth of democracy. And I really wonder whether you can have democracy without mass media, because, your democracy depends upon debate, which is based upon an accepted set of facts, or at least an accepted set of knowledge. And of course, there's always been people who've represented things in different ways. That's why, you have newspapers and medias from different political opinions. But I do think the consequences of this are pretty serious. Am I surprised? I guess not massively, in the sense that, you look at the way that, revenues for news organisations are falling, and it's difficult. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I think, the consequences for democracy are very serious, and I think the consequences for society as a whole are, when there is so very much of great importance happening in the world. But it may be related to that sense of powerlessness about, for example, about Gaza that I was just talking about a moment ago.
Or is it the case, and I'd be interested to know from both of you, in fact, what your students make of this or say about this, because I think most of us here at this table, certainly myself and James, Julie, can remember a time when it was not possible to immerse yourself from dawn to dusk in the news cycle, even if you were the kind of massive current affairs nerd who wants to become a journalist. So say, like, as recently as the mid-1990s, you could buy 4 Sunday papers, and Lord knows I did. You could watch the news at 6 o'clock, which I'm sure I did if I was in, and you could maybe catch up with Newsnight or something of the sort later in the evening, and or you could listen to the radio. But that's still, even if you were really working at it, a couple of hours tops. Yeah. And now people are kind of boiling their brains in it.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's the paradox to James's point. It's not that, we're not having your free media now. It's just, it's so omnipresent. There's so many different sources. And I see it with my students that they get very overwhelmed by that. And so their response is to kind of check out. And these are politics students. So a lot of them are very informed, but others, when you ask them, they will, a lot of them will just look at Instagram and they'll follow news sites on Instagram, but that's how they kind of get their news, or kind of on Reels and stuff. And so this idea of actually sitting down, like reading a newspaper, I think has been lost. So I think there's the volume, there's the shift from more print consumption to more very short form video consumption. And then, yes, just this sense of 24-hour all the time, which was coming up as I was a kid, but again, it was more, you still had to go and turn on the TV, and then on most stations, like sports still came on after the news or whatever, and so you had like the newspaper, you had the evening news, and I think people like me, we remember that time, and so you can kind of self-monitor how often you're checking the news, but for students or for something just in our professions, it's not possible to turn it off, and I do think people start feeling the stress of that, and they kind of go the other direction and just say, okay, nothing for me then.
James, is there also something, James, in the nature of what you can now immerse yourself in? Because to pick one obvious horrifying example, that wave of theatrical executions by Islamic State of various prisoners when they were a thing a decade or so ago, under the previous media model, in fact, it's arguable they wouldn't have bothered carrying out those executions, because under the previous media model, there would have been no imaginable way anybody could have seen that footage, because absolutely no news broadcaster would show it. I think probably quite rightly, but also beyond that, until social media in particular, most people never got to see verite footage of what war actually looks like up close, because, even current affairs late at night was still sensitive to who might be watching. Yeah. Is that having an effect on people, perhaps to the extent that people just go, I can't watch this?
Well, it may be, but I mean, I think it's also, when you look around the world at the moment, there's not a lot to be cheery about. There's not much, everywhere you look, the politics is in a mess, the economy of many parts of the world's in a mess. We've got the climate crisis as well. I can understand why people, might feel like avoiding this, but it is, as I say, a very important time to keep oneself, to keep oneself informed. I mean, I think there may well be something to what you say, that you would never have seen something like this. But also, I think if people go and follow, I think established news organisations, even quite small ones, that do a lot of stuff on social media, they do avoid doing things like that, because I think there are expectations. If you look at the BBC or the Sky News feed on social media, you would not expect to see something.
No, you
like
wouldn't.
But you can find it if you want to look for it, obviously.
Well, that's what I mean, Julie. Even if you are curious, arguably misguidedly curious, if I want to watch somebody getting their head sawn off, I can watch that within 10 seconds of the thought occurring to me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right. The type of content that's coming through is so different now, and I would say is often intentionally that way. And I think it's because it's not just the volume of news that people are sifting through, but you have to compete with every other form of entertainment ever made possible, any made available to humans. And so you're in a constant competition against that. And so you start getting more sensational coverage, at least by some outlets. Again, I agree, not all, though. But
Well, let's move along to the latest demonstration of the perils of ever doing anything in public in the age of the social media panopticon. A Polish businessman by the name of Piotr Cieszyrik, perhaps driven suddenly insane by the insufficiency of vowels in his surname, was caught on camera at the US Open snatching a cap that a young fan had been offered by Polish tennisist Kamil Mazurek. Once identified, Cieszyrik was duly monstered on social media, as was the paving company he runs. After trying gamely to style it out, he has now buckled, apologised and returned the hat, and its originally intended owner has been offered a bunch more merch by Mazurek. Apologies to all our Polish listeners. I try with the surnames, I do. James, you go to a lot of sporting events.
I do.
Have you ever, in the grip of passion, seized a trinket offered by a player to a small child?
No, but I have seen it happen more than once. I'm afraid it's a shame to say. I mean, no, I haven't. I mean, but there's one particular incident I can remember. A few years ago when Tottenham Hotspur were playing at Wembley Stadium because their stadium was being rebuilt. And I went, it was towards the end of the season, I went with a friend of mine and his son, who I think was about 15 or 16 then, who at the end of the match, we were quite close to the line, and the players, as you know, at football and other things, come and throw their shirts sometimes. Anyway, the young lad went down to try to get one of the players' shirts, and my friend and I waited on the concourse for him. He duly appeared shortly afterwards with a player's shirt, with the Manchester City player's shirt, pursued by a man aged about 45, probably, saying, "I just wanted to make sure he got back to his dad okay." And I think he had been, you know, but my friend's son told me afterwards that he tried to muscle him out of the way when the players came and threw it. I mean, quite often the players will point at a particular kid in the crowd and say, "I want it to go to her or him." But it doesn't stop, you know, middle-aged men who really, really should know better from trying to muscle in. So this does not surprise me one little bit as somebody who sees a lot of live sport.
Even speaking someone myself, Julie, who enjoys sport and occasionally attends live sport, I will concede that any sports ground is a great place to find yourself thinking, what the hell is wrong with people?
Absolutely. And you know, I think to our comments about the media stuff, I mean, I think people love stories like this, and they like, because everyone has seen something like this in some kind of context. And like the fact that someone is getting called out for it, the fact that there was like justice given to the kid becomes this like kind of hero story in some kind of way. But yeah, I would say, you know, I do go to a lot of sport. I haven't seen this kind of thing as much, though. I guess I don't stay around for the crowd throwouts as much. But yeah, I mean, you just see people like totally go crazy at sports things. Become totally different people.
No, I've never been presented with any such dilemma myself. I did have the football land in my lap when I went to see Greater Western Sydney at home to my team Geelong in Canberra a few years ago, but you're not allowed to keep the ball at Australian football matches because they're quite expensive, so there was nothing for me to do really but give it back to the boundary umpire. But I got to be the guy who throws the ball back to the boundary umpire. That was quite exciting. But what I wanted to get into with this was not so much the chap at the centre of it, James. I mean, it's a jerkish thing to do, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But it's the response to it, because people then did set out to hound, harass and pester this man, destroy his business, threaten him, and at that point I guess, again, you get to ask the question, what the hell is wrong with people?
I know, especially if... I suppose if it meant that the little lad got the cap in the end, then I guess it's a kind of happy ending to the story. And, you know, he got to meet the player and everything. But I know, it's just, you just think this guy should be suitably ashamed. He did the right thing in the end, although subsequently, and then let's just let it go. But, I mean, it's interesting because,
he does have the advantage that because nobody will be able to pronounce his name, he will be quite quickly forgotten. If his name...
also be quite easy to find online.
Yeah, but if his name was Bill Smith, this would be a
but I mean, it does also illustrate. I mean, a lot of these sort of elite sporting events are very expensive to attend these days. So that means that, you know, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't say in any of the media reports how successful or otherwise this paving company is, but I'm guessing he paid quite a lot to go to watch the match. So I don't know if he really needed to, you know, to be that acquisitive and grab a hat off a kid, but I mean, maybe he did. He was the souvenir he didn't have. I don't know.
No, not defending his behaviour at all, but it is, Julie. It's the baying mob.
Yeah, I do think that this like public flogging response to some of these things that should just be like, right, we should just like, be able to get a story out of it, and I guess maybe people feel the justice won't come with it. But
the guy was duly shamed. It's just let's draw a line and move on. You know?
Yeah, and I think just, you know, we are at a moment. I don't know, maybe because people feel they can't do things on bigger problems in the world. They jump on things like this.
We can get this guy.
But it does feel
we can get this kiddie's hat back.
Right. But it does feel a little bit like, really, like this is what you're like putting your effort into, is like shaming this guy, and like, God, we've all done horrible, not horrible. We've all done some crazy things, and I'm glad we're not like broadcast out to the world. So,
well, on that reflective note, which does actually, now that I think of it, prompt a few follow-up questions, but we don't have time. Julie Norman and James Rogers, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, Ireland prides itself correctly on a knack for storytelling, though at least one Irish person is concerned that the tradition is waning somewhat. With this in mind, Ciaran Gaffney, founder of Seanchoíche, launched Storytelling Nights. Starting off as a passion project, Seanchoíche now hosts events around the globe and for multinational corporations. Monocle Monocle's Anita Riota sat down with Ciaran to discuss why he thinks storytelling is still important, what companies can learn from it, and how Irish culture sits at the heart of this tradition. She started by asking him to describe Seanchoíche in his own words.
So Seanchoíche is a storytelling event that I set up over 3.5 years ago. It's just shy of 4 years old. And it's a storytelling platform at this point where we run storytelling nights in different cities around the world, where we get around 8 to 10 members of the public to get up and tell their stories. They'll have volunteered to tell their stories in the weeks leading up to the event, and each night will revolve around a certain theme. So the night could be centered around the theme of love, or the theme of friendship, or the theme of embarrassment, or mistakes. It completely varies from night to night. And each story goes on for no more than 10 minutes. And it's basically a lot of different people coming in with their stories and how they would approach the theme differently. And it becomes this symphony of different emotions, different narratives, different experiences that the remaining people in the room, of which there are generally around in between 80 to 150 people, can relate to each story and hopefully maybe feel inspired to think of their own story. And its main function, its main objective is to shape perspective through storytelling, to give people, I suppose, a new perspective and also validate those who attend the event's perspectives and their own experiences and the own emotions that they've felt. But the event obviously started off as a very Irish event, and I suppose one of its main functions at the beginning was to kind of bring back to life this ancient tradition of storytelling that is so unique to Ireland, or so particular to Ireland. But now what we've seen is we've had over 70 nationalities come and share their stories at our events, and it almost feels like having a walking tour around the world when you have 8 different nationalities each share their story, where they might have some cultural nuances in their story that really kind of speaks to their own heritages. And that's what's made the event so special, is that it's become so diverse and so innately human as well.
Well, I've been to a few Seanchoíche nights myself, and I can absolutely attest to the fact that the speakers will have you laughing hysterically one moment and then in real tears of sadness the next, and that is the beauty of it. But I wanted to touch on one of the things you brought up. In August alone, you've held events in New York, Limerick, Dublin, London, Copenhagen, Sydney, Perth, Melbourne. I think that's all of them. I might even be missing some. Why has going international been important to you, and what do you think it adds to the project?
I think it globalizes something very innately Irish that's kind of slipped by the wayside in terms of Irish reputation. I think Ireland has always been very well known for sports. It's also heavily associated with alcohol and its history. But one thing that a lot of people maybe don't celebrate enough is how important storytelling is to Irish culture. And I think it's really coming to life now on, the cinema screens and in music. We're seeing so many incredible Irish artists and Irish actors and screenwriters, really come to life and, be recognized internationally. And I think a lot of that comes down to the storytelling culture and the gravitational pull towards storytelling that Ireland has always had. And I think that it's only really within the past couple of years that storytelling tradition and nuance to Irish culture has really been crystallized into events like Seanchoíche. And I think it's so important that as many people as possible see what this event is all about. Even we had a woman come to us recently who is from Lagos, and we're actually going to be bringing Seanchoíche to Lagos later on in the year. Yeah, it's so exciting. And she told me that, growing up in Lagos, she lived in a really densely populated part of the city where they'd often they would never really be able to see the stars apart from when they lost electricity, which would happen sporadically through the year. So when they'd lose electricity in their neighborhood, the sky would lift and would be the only chance that the whole entire neighborhood would get to see the stars. And when this would happen, they would all go up onto the rooftops and listen to the elders that lived in the building and share their stories. And I thought that was just so magical and so similar to Irish storytelling culture in a way, but also so different for different circumstances as well. And I think what Seanchoíche has really taught me is that storytelling is universal. It's in every culture because it is the crux of culture. It's the last thing that will unite every single human being, is that we all have lived our own experiences and we've all have our own stories to share.
Now, I know that you've expanded the remit of what you do to include a corporate offering, and you've done that now with companies such as Google, Spotify, Guinness, and more. Can you tell us what this new branch is and what you think it can offer to these companies?
Yeah, so over the past 3 years, we've started running storytelling workshops in our corporate partners, and we also run storytelling events that are employee-led in companies as well. And this is an amazing opportunity to allow workforces really connect with one another and give them the toolkits that they need to tell their own story, to tell the brand story for the company that they're working for, to back themselves in an interview, in a sales pitch, in a presentation. And we've done this in over 50 companies in Ireland, the UK, America, Australia, and we're going to continue taking it to many more places throughout the next couple of years. It's been so interesting seeing the impact on the companies that we've worked with and the general morale in the companies too that we've worked with. We're seeing, the impact across the business not only, allows people within the company feel a little bit more heard and also express themselves and get better at storytelling, but it also really builds employee retention. People will be coming back into the office much more regularly after we run these events. Employees feel really validated, they feel supported, and a lot of these people have gone on to present on their sales pitches, and they've gone on to be the kind of leaders and spokespeople for their teams, whereas previously they had never done any public speaking in their entire life. And we believe it's a really nice gateway for people to get better at public speaking by getting them to master their own personal story, because no one knows your personal story better than yourself. And then the same skills that you learn in these workshops, you can then apply to your day-to-day working environment.
That was Monocle's Anita Riota speaking to Ciaran Gaffney, founder of Seanchoíche. That's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Julie Norman and James Rogers. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Henry King. Our sound engineer was Lily Austin. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.